The ghosts of earlier writers are present in any work of literature that we read. We detect traces of writers whom the authors themselves liked, people they chose as models. But the relationship is not always a harmonious one. It can be problematic. Earlier writers can pose a threat to new writers. Theories of literary influence help us to approach how authors deal with their predecessors, both in conscious and unconscious ways. In week 1, I said that romantics attached new importance to the figure of the author. And this didn't only apply to themselves, they were looking backwards as well, interested in the personalities of people like Shakespeare and Milton in a way that was new. And it was kind of a mixed blessing because it intimidated them as well as inspiring them. The most significant critical study of literary influence is by a scholar named Harold Bloom, and his book is called The Anxiety of Influence. The key word there is anxiety. In his book, Bloom plays a kind of psychoanalyst to literary authors. He interprets their text by reference to their mental state and various kinds of emotional baggage towards other writers they know of. Bloom's interpretative model is based on Freud's theories of the defense mechanism and his theory of the Oedipus Complex. Sigmund Freud's theory of the Oedipus Complex is derived from ancient Greek tragedy, in which Freud theorizes struggles are played out which take place within all people. In Greek myth, Oedipus is adopted as an infant. Consequently, he doesn't know that a man he kills in a chance encounter is his father, and that the woman he marries is his biological mother. Freud's theory of the Oedipus complex deviates from this a little bit. While the ancient Greek story of Oedipus relies on the character not knowing who his true parents are, Freud's theory is to do with people having repressed feelings towards those who they know are their parents. Harold Bloom's use of the Oedipus complex has more to do with the feelings towards the father figure than the mother figure. At the heart of Bloom's theory is a set of conflicting emotions which he hypothesizes authors feel towards their literary predecessors, the father figures. He says it's a mingling admiration and resentment. The admiration is maybe intuitive to us. I want to be a writer, I like these writers, I wouldn't mind emulating their style in certain ways. The resentment is an apprehension that the people who've come before us have maybe said it all already, or they have said it better than we have. How can we be as good? How can we hope to say something original? And our feeling towards the predecessor in such a case is that we want to remove the threat somehow, figuratively, to murder the father figure and clear our own space. Why should we care? Well, Bloom's hypothesis isn't just an abstract set of feelings which he says authors entertain towards their predecessors. He says it plays out in the texts that authors write in a number of ways, which he outlines as follows. Bloom says that literary influence gives rise to 6 different kinds of response, and in order to make himself sound intellectual, he gives them unnecessary Latin names. The first he refers to as clinamen, meaning to swerve, and this is a kind of corrective response, as though we consider an earlier author to have made some kind of mistake, so that in response we turn away from it, we try to go in a different direction. As with some of Bloom's other theories here, you'll see that this is kind of self-defeating potentially, because even if you try not to do what another person did, aren't you still defining yourself by that person? Bloom's second response is called tessera. This is the Latin name for a tile like you'd find in a mosaic. He means that we might view an earlier writer's work as incomplete and we add a piece to it to finish the picture, perhaps even changing the overall picture when we do that. Bloom's next term is kenosis, and literally it means self-emptying, as though we might purge the examples of predecessors. Bloom uses it to denote specific moments in the act of composition when an author recognizes that he or she is simply repeating the work of an earlier writer and deliberately and consciously discontinues that effort. Diamondization should not be mistaken for demonization. They are different terms. Diamondization refers to the daimon, a mysterious spirit which enters the body of a person, compelling him or her to act in certain ways. And the Greeks had a belief that creativity was a supernatural experience effected by a spirit. Bloom suggests that the idea of daemonization or inspiration will appeal to a writer as a way of making himself or herself equal to the literary predecessor. The writer will say, I am subject to the same kind of inspiration as the predecessor. It was nothing special about the personality of the predecessor. That person was simply moved to write by the daimon in the same way that I seek to be. There's no reason that I would be inferior to the predecessor. At other times, a writer might take an existing text, which Bloom calls a parent text, and consciously and deliberately rework that, adapting it, modernising it, updating it, or changing it in particular ways. Bloom refers to this as ascesis, meaning an exercise. And finally, Bloom refers to what he calls the return of the dead, apophrodes, which means that a writer will explicitly engage with the presence of the predecessor in the literary work. We might see this, for example, in Dante's Divine Comedy, in which Virgil, for example, turns up, and when writers write poems which are explicitly about other writers. Keats's sonnet about Shakespeare, Keats's sonnet about episodes from the Divine Comedy, that sort of thing. So some writers confront their debt to predecessors head on in their works. There are commonalities between the different states Bloom hypothesizes, but I think the take-home point is simply that literary influence is surprisingly fraught with anxiety. It is often a struggle, a psychological minefield in which new authors are troubled, feeling desperate and uncertain as they attempt to assert themselves, fearful that everything has already been written.